Hi folks, Damon from AWS here, and today I want to talk to you about using IAM-based authentication with EMR Studio. When we first released EMR Studio, we had support for AWS Single Sign-On, or SSO. So if you had an existing Active Directory or identity provider, you could sync that with SSO and then assign those users or groups access to EMR Studio. Well, sometimes, especially if you're just getting started with EMR Studio or you're already using IAM, you just want to be able to use your existing IAM users to log into EMR Studio, and today you can do that. So let's get started. In the EMR Studio documentation, we provide an overview of how to choose a different authentication mode for EMR Studio. So if you're already familiar with IAM or have set up IAM Federation, this is a great time for you to use IAM Authentication with EMR Studio. If you're new to AWS or EMR, check out SSO Authentication mode. This provides really easy user and group assignment to AWS resources. Before we get started, there are a few prerequisites to spinning up EMR Studio. If we go over to GitHub, we have our EMR Studio samples repository, and in there, we've got these Studio dependencies down here. This creates a set of different dependencies you need for EMR Studio. This creates a VPC with the subnets with the proper tags on them for different permissions. It'll create an S3 bucket for you to store your notebooks in, and a couple different security groups for you as well. The only thing I had to do in here was this also creates some EMR cluster templates, and I just had to add the role that I'm using for my IAM authentication to that cluster template portfolio. So if you want to be able to allow your people that are using EMR Studio to easily spin up EMR clusters, that's the only change I had to make there in terms of that CloudFormation template. So let's hop over to the EMR console. So in EMR Studio, we can go in here and we can actually just click on Get Started. When we click Get Started, we get a screen with a couple different options. And so in here, you've got a link to Service Catalog, and Service Catalog is what you can use to create cluster templates for different types of people that want to use Studio. For example, you can have a data science cluster template that spins up maybe a compute-intensive EMR cluster, or you can even have a GPU template that spins up a GPU-specific cluster. You can make these templates and provision them to different users and groups inside your organization. And then you can just go ahead and create a studio. So I will go and click that to create our studio. We'll just give this studio a name, so we'll call it Quartz Studio. We need a VPC and subnet to put this in, so I'll go ahead and select that. We can create default security groups for you if you want. The main thing to call out here is that if you want to be able to access Git from inside EMR Studio, you need to have a security group that allows outbound access to port 443. We already have some security groups that are created as part of that CloudFormation template, so I'm just going to go ahead and click those now and add those in here. So we've got our Workspace security group and Engine security group. If you scroll down a little bit more, this is where you can select between IAM and SSO mode. If you are using an identity provider with IAM Federation, you can select them here. But if not, that's totally fine. We can just leave this blank. The one thing we do need here is this service role. So this service role allows EMR Studio to create all the different resources it needs as part of EMR Studio. So we've already got a service role that's created with that CloudFormation template. And then finally, we need a place to store all of our notebooks. So we'll take the bucket that was created as part of the CloudFormation template, and we're ready to go. So we'll go ahead and click Create Studio. And that's it. Now there's your studio. You've got an access URL that folks can use to be able to go and access the studio, and you can see the authentication mode right there. So let's go ahead and drop into our studio. When you first sign into the studio, since I'm already logged in with my IAM account, that just signs me directly into EMR Studio. And then once we're in here, we have the option to create a new workspace. And a workspace is just a collection of fully managed Jupyter notebooks. Inside of EMR Studio, I can also manage my EMR and EC2 clusters and my EMR and EKS clusters if I want to. But right now, I'm just going to go ahead and create my workspace. I'll enter a name for that workspace. We'll call it Quartz Workspace. And we'll select a subnet to place this in. And now this is where the cluster templates come into play. So if you're creating a new workspace, you can attach it to an existing EMR cluster. This is the most basic level of access. If you have folks coming in here, you can just go ahead and say you can only connect to existing clusters if you want. But you can grant folks different levels of access too. So if you want, you can create an entirely new EMR cluster from scratch. And we've got this really easy interface here for creating an EMR cluster. or you can use a cluster template, and this is where it connects to Service Catalog. So in here, I can go ahead and select different templates that are in here. You can parameterize those templates, so you can allow your folks to choose a different instance type if you want, and name their cluster or a specific EMR release. And then when they create this workspace, we'll go ahead and create that cluster and attach the notebook to that cluster. But right now, I've already gone ahead and created this one node cluster, so I'm just going to attach my workspace to that cluster. So you can see it's listed right there. And when I go ahead and create workspace, what this is doing behind the scene is it is creating an EMR notebook environment for me. So a managed Jupyter notebook environment. So that's going to go ahead, create that environment, and connect me to that cluster. So let me just go ahead and refresh here. Great, you can see that it is now attaching to the cluster. So if I go ahead and click that workspace and hop into it, this launches my managed Jupyter Notebook environment. And what we'll see is that I'm inside Jupyter Lab here, and I should be connected to the cluster fairly quickly here. So let me just load this up. Awesome. So now I've got my Jupyter Notebook here. You can see I've got a few different options to spin up notebooks or consoles. There's also this notebook examples here, which is really nice if you're looking to do something specific with EMR Studio. So we show you how to query hoodie data sets or work with Spark SQL. I'm just going to show, basic Python notebook here. So I go ahead and create my kernel here for Python 3. And we can see that my cluster is attached up there. And if I just go in here and I say, hello world, and execute that code, you can see we've got our Python code executing on the cluster. If we want to over here, I can actually go over to the clusters and I can detach from this cluster and attach to another cluster, or I can even go ahead and attach to an EMR on EKS cluster if I wanted to as well. I can also create new clusters from this interface, again, using just general EMR clusters or using a cluster template if I want to. And again, you get the same parameters there where you can kind of change your EMR release or cluster type if you want to. So that is getting started with EMR Studio and IAM Authentication. Pretty easy to get up and running. This is great if you just want to test out Studio, grant a few different users access to it. Again, let me know if you have any questions when you're in there and you're on the launcher. You can see we've got the notebook examples. I would love for you to take this for a spin and try it out, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I hope you all have a good one. Bye.